There are three techniques of scholarship. One is that you assume that your audience do not overlap so that you can give the same talk again and again. Two, you are glad when you don't have to speak. And third, if you are the last speaker, you only summarize what previous speakers have said. And I'm glad that my time is cut. So what I'm going to do is that I'm not going to go through the entire slides, but the topic that I picked up for today afternoon is not about perspectives about building educational technology, about theories of education, about how whether assessments and employability based education is right or wrong or whatever, but how do you build systems which involve some other concepts like this. Okay, so that's the kind of a system that we have built for Manipal. Can I switch this off? Yeah. I see in about 2007, Anand Sudarshan called me and Satish, and he basically gave us one line vision. He said that, look, we do need to build a technology that would eliminate the need for physical contact between teacher and the students. And then the scale he defined. So the scale of the EduNext which we built, which was recently awarded the Golden Peacock Award for Best Innovation. The scale and diversity is something like this. Now, Manipal offers all kinds of courses that you imagine, from undergraduate to graduate to postgraduate, engineering, management, medicine, humanities, whatever. And then we have in-campus institutions, we have a distance education program, we have everything. And then the number of subjects are about 700, and then we have 10,000 plus units of students, and a typical classroom size, so therefore can vary anywhere between 20 students to 50,000. So that's the diversity that we are looking at. So Satish and I are software people, okay, and then we build good software systems. So we said not a problem. Now we build systems with millions of transactions before. So what is it? This is another transactional system. So we picked up an LMS, and then we sized the hardware, and then we realized that we completely got it wrong. So where we got it wrong is somewhere here. See, if you see what you call Web 2.0, 3.0, the learning theories, etc. See, as computer scientists, what we know is what is on the left side. Okay, we know the semantics of information connections. We know HTMLs, we know Java, we know XML, we know RSS, we know OpenIDs, so on. But on this other side, if you see how the progress is, now you are talking about social applications, right? What you could do with them. And so far, till up to 2005 or 6, the only group collaborative applications that we know of are basically a variation on CC and BCC. You have your email with CC and BCC. Most groupware applications, most workflow applications are a variation on that. Which is what has completely gone wrong, as it turned on its head when we started to build systems like this because of this. Number one is that you are not talking about even millions or even thousands of nodes, you are actually talking about billions of nodes. And two, the evolution of semantics is from semantics of data to semantics of cultures. And then we are not actually talking about top-down structures because it's not possible to impose anybody's view. Okay, as a system designer, I can't say that, look, this is how I will deliver a process. And this is what we understand in software very well. If you tell me a banking system, I know how to build it. Okay, because I know the process very well. Okay, it has a certain number of people, they have a certain number, kinds of roles, and then there are certain types of functions they do, and then you put it together, and then you have a transactional system, you release it, done. But here it doesn't work like that. And then it's not applications for individual, but it's an application for groups, which we really didn't know what it was. And then they were talking about self-organizing communities and so on. So we finally understood at somewhere that it's not about static equilibrium, which as software designers we all strive for all the time. Okay, your software systems very quickly come to equilibrium. Right? I can't have inconsistent data. I can't have inconsistent transactions. I can't have broken links. This is how we design software for static equilibrium. but we are actually here talking about something like a dynamic harmony. Okay. So that was the first lesson. So let me skip this because it's a pretty theoretical one, because in terms of interoperability, I think we are actually going from syntactic interoperability to all the way up to semantic interoperability. So let me talk about actually what goes into building systems like this. Number one is that collaboration assumes an absence of hierarchy. Now, even from the point of view of designing systems, if we want to collaborate, we can't be hierarchical. Okay? Because in all our computer science, in all our design, we are taught, we know how to build hierarchical systems, relational databases, transactional systems. Right? You name it, we know how to build hierarchical systems. And collaboration assumes absence of hierarchy. So that is the first counterintuitive learning. For example, now in the web, there are no hierarchical log managers. Now, there are no transactions. And then I wrote, for example, a blog post, and then you write another one giving a link to mine, and then I delete my post. So you have a broken link, and which is fine. Right? So the web is always as inconsistent as the world outside is. And that's an idea that was very hard for us as designers to get. Okay? And once you understand it, it's actually a very liberating thought, because you can build systems very easily. Now the problem of scale suddenly is removed. Now I'm not talking about scale of 500 million students and then they becoming very wise men in another 10 years. That's not the scale I'm talking about. I'm simply talking about the scale of the number of operations I do, the amount of data that I move, etc. And then the other thing that the Web 2.0 systems did is that now instead of process consuming people, it is people choose and adopt a process. Okay? So from protocols we move to constitutions. A constitution is a social protocol, right? If you go to Wikipedia, for example, the system does not enforce anything. See, there is an idea of neutrality. System does not enforce that. Okay? And then if you are a contributor, you become an editor and then you get certain rights. System does not enforce that. And then the other thing is that you go to any of these applications, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Wikipedia, the allure, the attraction is that you are straight away working with content. There is no software in which data is put. Okay, which is the kind of things that we are used to in our life, is that you first get a software. Okay, the menus and then commands and all that, and then finally your file somewhere sits inside. Okay, this is actually turned it on its side, okay, where it is now behavior embedded in the content rather than data embedded in software. So that's another change. So this meant that a lot happens behind the scenes. That is, as I get data into my system, it actually goes through a process of enrichment before you actually see it. Means there is a series of steps by which actually we start to put behavior into the content. For example, the cross links, okay, or the semantic, the tags, or the actions that you can take on that, or the comments that you can. So these are all the behavior that is embedded, which is relevant to that particular piece of content that you are actually looking at. So this is another. This is how our content repositories now are represented. I'll talk a little bit more about it towards the end. And then finally, this I already talked about. A protocol assumes the existence of a constitution at some level. Okay. So the large systems that succeeded, whether it's a Wikipedia or whether it's a Slashdot or whether it is Facebook, is where there is some kind of a constitution which the group decides, which the group enforces without the system enforcing anything on them. Meaning, the designers of the system does not assume a constitution that the people will follow. Okay. So what kind of a cultural mechanisms are required for a very large community? And finally, it's something that Sadesh and I finally came to an understanding, that you need a culture of Swikriti, which Amartya Sen wrote about in Argumentative Indian. It comes down to one simple principle, that everybody has a place. It's as simple as that. You have a place to voice your opinion. You have a place to say what you want to. You have a place to be yourself. And if a culture allows for that, then that culture. Okay, otherwise, the voice of dissent is killed, and then there is subversion which will come. So one reason why, for example, it's impossible to brainwash anybody in India is probably because of English, right? Whereas in cultures like China and in Iran, because of the language barriers, the powers that be can control what information can flow. Okay, so things like that. And finally, the nature of a community is that number one is that there is a notion of membership. Okay, and two, there is a notion of stature in a community. And stature does not come from what I accomplished, but what I contributed to the community. Okay, that's the notion of stature in a community, which is something that can be powerfully exploited when we now talk about assessments, etc. Because it's not about what you have learned, but what actually you have contributed to the community, right? Which is again is something that you see some of the quote unquote the new social systems are doing, right? The top 500 reviewer on Amazon.com, the top 500 rating is given for the contribution that he made to that community, right? Not for what he has accomplished individually. And then see there is also the notion of semantics of users. It's not just that everybody is same. Okay, see there is I may be a gardener, interested in knows the relationship between earth and the plants, and then there may be somebody who is a farmer who knows how to cultivate large pieces of land. Okay, these two are two different semantics. Okay, so which is how we would like to exploit going forward. And then two, now as people have been saying, the communities tend to be goal oriented and they tend to organize themselves. And then more importantly, there is an expert and formal knowledge and there is a tacit and informal knowledge. Okay. Now, it is this informal knowledge which in our culture we call stories. Right? It is the entertainment value of a story that ensures its survival. So the tacit knowledge or the informal knowledge is nothing but folklore. Okay. So coming back, orality and then this is another learning that we had in the last 4 years, which is that orality and folklore are very, very key to communities. To the extent that silent reading that we are all used to now is a very recent phenomenon. It only came sometime in the 10th century, I think, or 9th or 10th century. Before that, texts were always meant to be read aloud. Okay, and then in fact, I think in most of my childhood, we were taught that look, you should read aloud. No, don't read silently. When you read aloud is when it comes alive. Okay, that is the reason why we need to hear. If I write this same talk in 50-page document and then you read it, probably you don't get what I am currently speaking. So there is a theory by James Haynes, and then he actually talks about that apparently it is our ears that understand, not our eyes. Now you look at the same piece of text, you ask it the questions, it will answer the same, it will give you the same answer again and again and again. But in an oral performance, the same talk, suppose if I give it tomorrow, it will be a different performance, right? So there is a place for orality, which is what in fact even Socrates, there is I think the 7th dialogue with Plato, where Phaedrus goes and reads the text to Socrates, and then Socrates says that look, words they're dead, they have no life, because they tell you the same thing again and again. You ask them a million questions, they can only give you one answer. So there is something that about orality which is key to the communities, which is how in India it has always been practiced, right? There are communities in India which have a text, and then there is a retelling of the story, a retelling of they actually build an entire culture around it, right? Because there is orality involved, so there is a community involved, okay? And then there is a text that on which this community actually is built, but they never go and refer to the text. You ask them about the text, they say that it is in the temple. Okay. In my home, I used to have texts which we never really opened. They are always in that puja room. Okay, you only open them on the Dashra and put them back. But there is an entire family tradition that in some sense is connected to the text. So there is an idea of a written text and a received text. Okay. So the received text is what now happens in a classroom, right? So you have a subject, and then we make a course out of the subject, and then there are certain lectures that I prepare, and then I deliver the lectures. Okay, that is when something actually is received, and a lot happens. So what we are now trying to do is, so this I can skip because I already talked about it. So what we are trying to do, maybe by 2015, is that these are the 5 problems I think that we talked about in the last 2 days. One is that how do we handle thinly distributed expertise. So a lot of people talked about that all information is available on the web. There is open courseware. There are experts now freely available, etc., etc. Whom, from our context of EduNext, we consider them as gardeners. Okay? They are the ones we don't consider open content as a course material. We treat it as knowledge that is generated, which need to be contextualized, which need to be converted into a course, which need to be delivered to students, and so on. So there is an idea of a gardeners and farmers, and then if we can form a community of the people who generate knowledge, even in IITs and then centers of excellence, and then there is a way of contextualizing it for this particular courses that you are offering. So there is something that one could actually do. Possibly even a royalty mechanism can work. So the difference between nurturing and cultivation. Then the quality of content creation goes back to the received text and then the written text that I spoke about, where what happens in a classroom, okay, including its problem solving, including the interactions that we have, if it is in some sense is captured and transformed, and if it is made available, people don't realize that we all are authors without text, right? What now we are doing is in some sense is a text that is created, but I am not yet an author. And similarly, there are texts without authors. And if that is actually exploited, then it is possible in the long run to create certain quality content. And and I think now we probably need to, we realize that ultimately what we build is a website. Now it looks like any other software that I talked about earlier. And then we need to radically redesign the user experience, not the look and feel. And then ultimately I think what we need to do is to build certain tools. Now, what is learning all about? Now it's you read, you study, you take notes, you talk, you answer questions, etc., and then something about it. I won't go into cheap, low cost versus affordable versus compelling technology, but we do have an idea emerging about the centrality of orality, where we do think that possibly a device can be made which is primarily oral in nature, okay, and then that could possibly make some difference. So I will stop here with a note of caution that ultimately, as a software engineer, Web 2.0 is probably all about writing on walls and bragging in blogs. At certain level, there is, I say all this with a, I'm bewildered. I'm torn between, I'm walking a road of faith and disbelief. I somehow think that yes, this will work, but that's not how I was taught. Okay? See, in India you have the two sides of the same coin, right? We have the saying that balanam radhanam balam, the strength of a child is in crying, and dandam dasagunam bhavet, right? Caning imparts certain good qualities. So that is the environment in which I grew up. So suddenly now we are now talking about removing all that, and I don't know whether it will work. The other thing that I don't know is that are we doing all this because we like it, or this is the only thing that we know how to do? So I'll stop that with that notion of caution. And do I have any time for questions?
Any questions? We can take one question if anybody has any.
Maybe I just belted through anyway. So.
Like speed. Okay.
Right. Thanks.